Joining us live is Professor Kieran Martin, formerly the founding CEO of the UK's National Cyber Security Centre. Really appreciate your time, Professor. Thank you. You're Britain's former top cyber advisor. What's your key piece of advice to Australia as we battle with a spate of cyber attacks on large corporations?
Well, good afternoon, thanks for having me. I think what's happened in Australia is rightly being described as a wake-up call. We've had a whole spate of damaging attacks, not just data breaches, but so-called ransomware attacks that have affected the actual provision of healthcare and things like the availability of food in shops across Europe and North America over the past year. We have a really serious problem of a safe haven for cyber criminals, mostly within Russia, but that's not the only part of the world. And there are things we can do to try and lessen the criminals' ability to act. But one of the most important things we need to be getting after is hardening our defences. And that's a global effort across our alliance of friendly countries like the UK and Australia.
You mentioned Russia. Which countries are actually leading the cyber race per se? Is it the case that Russia and China are more advanced in this area, or do countries like the US, UK, Australia, are we holding our own?
Well, in terms of the power to use cyber for political effect, if you like, cyber weapons, Russia and China are the leading hostile states. Russia tends to do things like interfere in elections. China tends to steal intellectual property, and these are all threats that we have to be aware of. From our own point of view, we can, and the UK, US and Australia have used cyber power against so-called Islamic State and so forth back a few years ago. But of course, we like to think correctly, in my view, that we act more responsibly with those powerful capabilities that we have. But what we're actually talking about here is criminals who are not acting out of political motivation. For the most part, they're acting in pursuit of money. And they're not so much controlled by, say, the Russian state. They are tolerated and they operate freely from within the Russian state. You don't have gangs like this hacking medical providers from within Australia, from within, say, the United Kingdom or the United States, because law enforcement goes after them. The problem we've got is the Russian state is allowing these people to operate freely. There's not a great deal we can do about that some of the time, so we have to make sure that our companies, our government departments, our data holders are protecting our data better than we've done to date.
The big story here in Australia today is obviously the Medibank data dump. We're starting to see information turning up on the dark web today. Just explain for our viewers what's likely to happen to that data from there, how it's used by other criminals, and as you were alluding to there, just how evasive they are in terms of trying to track them down and prosecute them.
Well, as the Australian Prime Minister has just said, I mean, this is a pretty horrible and serious situation. I think the details will take some time fully to emerge. But what happens, I'm not speaking specifically about Medibank, but what tends to happen in these cases is, firstly, and there's some reassurance here, the medical data of individuals tends not to appear on the open internet. No one's going to host it, and if someone tries to host a sort of searchable facility where you can just search the medical records of millions of Australians, it will get taken down. So we're not talking about easily accessible information here. What instead you'll have is the criminals who are trying to extort the company, and the company have correctly said that they're not going to pay the ransom. They've started to drip feed data onto the so-called dark web. That's harder to get access to, but it's not impossible. And the threat there is that they think it might embarrass the company into paying the ransom, or they might try and sell the data to other criminals. So I think people should hold their nerve, try and find out over the next few days if they are directly affected by some of these leaks, and then essentially work out and look to the government to provide advice on the extent to which they're exposed to risk. They might be exposed to greater risk of identity fraud, but we don't quite yet know. So let's be patient. Let's not catastrophize this as meaning that there's going to be a big public database of healthcare records. That's not going to be how it works. But information is out there in the public domain that shouldn't be, and we'll need to take a careful and methodical approach to managing the risks that come about because of that.